Let's explore using Django and Leaflet.js to display the positions dynamically of vehicles that we have in our database. So in this video, we're going to create a map using Leaflet and we're going to plot with markers the positions of these vehicles. And we're going to group these markers together using a Leaflet.js layer group. After we've done that, what we're going to do is create a simulator that's going to dynamically update the positions of these vehicles in the database. And then we're going to poll the backend every 5 seconds to get the updated positions and then update the markers on the Leaflet map dynamically. So we're going to have a map on our page that's displaying in real time the positions of these vehicles with a 5-second polling interval. It's not quite real time, but it's going to be fairly close. So let's get started. I have here a GitHub repository that contains starter code, and I'm going to push the final code to another branch at the end of this video, so you can check out this with the git clone command. I'll link this repository below the video and you can clone that code. Now I have this open in VS Code and we're going to explore the starter code a little bit. We have a Django model here, it's called vehicle, and it contains 2 fields storing the latitude and the longitude of the vehicle at a given time. So the starter code will have this model, and we also have 2 management commands. The first one here is called create vehicles, and this is a simple command. Within the handle method, what we're doing is we're generating 5 vehicle objects and storing those in our Django database. So we use the vehicle.objects.create function, and we're adding a latitude and a longitude, and those are selected using the random.uniform function, and we're selecting any latitude between 44 and 47 and any longitude between -100 and -80. Now I'm choosing these positions randomly, but they will be in the center to the north of the USA, and I think that's going to be in states such as North Dakota, Minnesota and Illinois, that kind of region. So that's going to give you some random locations in those areas. When we run this command, it will add them to the database and that will print a message at the end. So once you've cloned the repository, what you can do is you can install Django if you don't already have it, and we can run the python manage.py migrate command, and that's going to create a local SQLite database, and it's that database that's going to store our vehicle positions. Once we've done that, we can run this custom management command. It's called create vehicles. You can do that with python manage.py and then just the name of the command here, create vehicles. As you can see, that creates 5 vehicles and stores them in our database. So we have access to these vehicles now. So that handles the database. What I'm going to do is go to the templates directory and we're going to go to base.html, and I've got some code here that's loading up certain libraries in the head tag. We've got Bootstrap for styling, we've got HTMX. We're actually not going to use these in this video, but they're there anyway. What we also have is Leaflet.js, and we have a link tag loading the Leaflet styles and also a script tag below that contains the JavaScript code for the Leaflet module. Finally, just below that, we're using Django's static template tag here, and we're loading up a custom JavaScript file called script.js, and you can find that within the static directory, and it's this file here. At the moment, all it's going to do is console.log the message hello to the browser. We're going to change that throughout this video to add some code for Leaflet.js mapping. But what I want to do to begin with is we're going to close the script.js file and we're going to go to views.py. Now within this file we already have a very basic view called index, which is rendering this template. What I'm going to do is import the vehicle model from the models.py file. And what we want to do is we want to take our vehicles, all of them in the database, and we want to convert that to a list of dictionaries that we can then add to our templates as context, and use the JSON script template filter in order to generate a script tag containing all of the latitudes and longitudes. So what we're going to do in the context dictionary here, we're going to add a key here called vehicles, and that's going to map to a statement here. We're going to use the vehicle model here, and we're going to get the values from the database, and the 2 values we want to get are the latitude and of course the longitude as well. So that's going to fetch those 2 particular fields from our model. You can see that's the only 2 fields we have. We also have an implicit ID here as well, but we don't need that. So that's going to return all of the vehicles in the database, and it's going to return the latitude and longitude fields as a query set. We want to convert that query set to a Python list, so we can use the list function to do that. So the effect of this statement is, rather than a query set of Django models, what we instead have is a list of Python dictionaries, and that structure can then be used in our template if we go to the index.html, and it can be used with the JSON script template tag. So what we're going to do is reference that bit of context that we've just added called vehicles, and we can use the JSON script template filter to convert that to a script tag of type application JSON, and we can also give that an ID. In our case, we'll give it an ID of vehicle-json. Once we've done that, we can save the template file, and I'm going to run the Django run server command here at the bottom, and we're going to run the Django development server, and we're going to go to the page. Now I'm on the page just now. As you can see, it just says hello here, but if we inspect the DOM here by going to the developer tools, you can see as well as the div that contains an ID of map, underneath that we have a script with the ID of vehicle.json. If we expand that, you can see we have a list, or a JavaScript array in this case, of latitude and longitude pairs. So what we're going to do a little bit later in the video is we're going to get a reference to the script tag with this ID, and we're going to load these latitudes and longitudes into our JavaScript file, and we're going to then use them to render markers on the map. And after that, later on, we're going to update those markers dynamically so that the map that we have on the page is updating in real time, and positions of these vehicles are also updating. So that's the important first step of converting the database data to a structure that can then be used within the template and then referenced by our JavaScript. So let's close off the developer tools, and what we're going to do now is go to Leaflet's quick start guide here, and what I'm going to do is we're going to scroll down, and this contains some setup code for Leaflet.js. I'm going to link this page below the video. You can see it has the link and the script tag that we have in our base template from the starter code, so we don't need to add these, they're already there, and we also already have a div with the ID of map. If we go back to our template here and look at this div tag, you can see we've also added some styles, a height of 500 pixels and a width of 100%. And we also have this message of hello within the div. I'm actually going to remove that for now. Now let's go back to the quick start guide here. What we're going to do is reference this code here for setting up the map. I'm going to make the text a little bit bigger so we can see that better. Now this is how you actually access, or rather create, a map in Leaflet.js. We have an object called L, and that has a function called map that's used to actually generate the map. And that function takes as an argument the ID of the particular tag in the DOM that you want to add the map to. In our case, it's just a div with the ID of map, which is fairly standard. And then once that map is created, there's a function called setView, which takes some coordinates that you want to center the map on as a first argument, and also a zoom level as the second argument. So what we're going to do is go back to VS Code, and I'm going to go to this script that we have here. It's called script.js, and let's remove the console log statement. And we're going to write a JavaScript function here, and we're going to call it create map, and that's going to take two arguments, the center location and also the zoom level. So let's create the map variable here, and we're going to reference the l.map function. This takes the ID of the element that we want to add the map to, and then we can call that setView function and pass the center and the zoom level to that. And this code here on line 2, this will create our map object. There is one more step that we need to do in this function. If we go back to the documentation here for the quick start, we have this code here that adds a tile layer. We're just going to copy that and paste it into VS Code. Just below the map, we can paste that there, and I'm going to tab this over. So we create what's called a tile layer, and we are adding that to the map. And the final thing I want to do, because this is a function that's used to create the map, I'm actually just going to return the map to the caller so that we have access to that map when we call this function. So let's now try and actually call the function. I'm going to copy the name of this function, and we're going to go to the base, or rather the index.html, and we have a block here called scripts, and that extends the base template here where we've defined that block at the bottom. So this will just load any scripts that we have for a template right before the end of the body tag. So let's go back to index.html, and within this block we're going to create a script tag, and we're going to reference some JavaScript to actually load up the map here. So we want to create this map when the page loads, so I'm going to add an event listener to the document with the document.addEventListener function. And the event that we want to listen for is the DOM content loaded event. Basically that's the event that fires when the page first loads. And addEventListener takes a second argument here. It's a callback function that is called when this event occurs in the document. So when the page first loads, the body of this function is going to execute. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a variable called map, and we're going to call that function createMap that we just defined in our script.js. And we're going to pass a center location and a zoom level to that function. Now for the center location, I'm going to pass a JavaScript array with the latitude of 45.5 and a longitude of -90, and that's roughly halfway between the latitudes and longitudes that we defined here in this vehicle.objects.create statement that creates the random data. So we will have vehicles around about these latitudes and longitudes, and this is roughly the center point of those. And the second argument to our function was the zoom level, and I'm going to make the zoom level 5 in this case. So that creates the map object, and the second thing we want to do is get a reference to all the vehicle positions. So I'm going to create another variable called vehicles, and to get those we need the ID of this JSON script output, And what we're going to do is use the document.getElementById function to get that element with that ID. We then grab the text content, which is just the text within that element, and then finally we're going to call the JSON.parse function, and that is going to take that JSON data and bring it into this JavaScript as JavaScript objects, and those objects can then be referenced with dot notation as we're about to see. So before we go on, let's console.log these vehicles, and we're going to go back to the browser, back to our page, and we're going to refresh this page. Now you can see when we refresh the page, the map is appearing, and that's because we've created the map and we've added it to that div with the ID of map. If we go to the development console, you can see we have an array of 5 objects within the console here, and that's the latitudes and longitudes that have been loaded in from that JSON script output, and they're console logged here in our JavaScript code. So all good so far. The next step, I'm going to actually create something called a layer group in Leaflet.js. Let's go to the Leaflet documentation. Again, I'll link this page below the video. We have the API reference. Now you can see that in Leaflet.js we have different types of layers in the code. We have UI layers, we have raster and vector layers, and some of these are familiar things such as markers, which we use to denote a point or a position on the map. And we also have in the vector layers things like circles and rectangles, and also polylines that can be used to draw lines on the map. Now in Leaflet.js you can actually group different types of layers, different types of objects on the map into groups. You can see here we have a section for other layers, and we have a layer group and also a feature group. What we're going to do in this video is we're going to use a feature group. If we click this link, we're taken to the documentation for that, and this extends the layer group and it makes it easy to do the same thing to all of the objects or the layers within that group. For example, you can bind a pop-up to all of the layers at once, and so on. Now in order to create a feature group, all we need to do is use this L object from Leaflet and call the feature group function, and you can pass different layers or different objects that you want to add to that group as a parameter. So let's go back to VS Code, and just below this console.log statement, I'm going to create a new variable here, and let's call this variable marker feature group, and we're going to set that equal to l.featureGroup. And we're not going to pass any objects to that right away, but what we are going to do is add it to our map that we have received back from the createMap function. So we're creating a feature group and we're adding it to the map. And once we've done that, what we can do is we can create a for loop in JavaScript, and we're going to say let vehicle of vehicles. So we're iterating over the vehicles that we received back from that JSON script output, and we're going to add as a marker each vehicle's position to that feature group that we've just created. Now to create a marker, we can use the l.marker function, and we can pass to that the vehicle's latitude and longitude. So let's create a JavaScript array here and reference the vehicle.latitude, and the second parameter is the vehicle.longitude. So that's going to create the marker at that position, and then we can add that marker to our feature group called marker feature group here. So let's save that file and we can go back to the page. If we refresh this page, you can see we now get these markers appearing on the map, and these markers are placed on the map as part of this feature group that we've created here. And when we create the marker object, we are adding it to that feature group there rather than the entire map. So we can group these markers together into a feature group, and this is the initial map that we see here. Now what we want to achieve in this video is we want to update the positions of these markers to reflect changing positions of the vehicles in the database. So we're going to write a simulator that is going to update the position of these vehicles every 5 seconds and update the database coordinates for the latitude and the longitude that we see in our Django vehicle model. Now we have the skeleton of another management command in the starter code. This command is called simulate vehicle movements, and we have the handle function here that currently raises a not implemented error. So let's remove that error, and we're going to define a variable here, and we're going to call it lat long variation, and we're going to set that equal to 0.1. Now I'm going to add a comment after this variable, and it's going to explain why we're setting it to 0.1, and that's because 0.1 degrees is approximately 11 kilometers. So we're going to use that a little bit later in the code. Let's create an infinite loop here by using the while true statement. And each time this while loop runs, we're going to print that the vehicle positions are updating, and then we're going to use the time.sleep call, and we're going to sleep for 5 seconds. And in between these two statements, we're going to define code that's going to update each vehicle. So now we need to update the positions of these vehicles. We're going to do that within a for loop here, and we're going to say for vehicle in vehicle.objects.all. So for each vehicle, we're going to change its latitude and longitude. Let's paste a statement in here. We are setting the vehicle.latitude equal to what it was before, and we're adding, again using the random.uniform function, a value somewhere between minus 0.1 and positive 0.1 to the previous value. and we can get a value between those using the random.uniform function from the random module. And we're going to do the exact same thing below that for the longitude. We're just setting it equal to the previous longitude plus some random value between -0.1 and +0.1. Once we've done that, we can use the vehicle.save function, and that's going to save the new latitude and longitude to the database. Now the goal that we have here is to be able to run this command here, which is simulating some updates to the positions of vehicles, and we want the leaflet map that we have on the front end here to also update to reflect the new positions of these vehicles. So what we're going to need to do from our client-side code from the JavaScript is we're going to have to send an AJAX request to our Django backend, and that AJAX request will have to fetch the new positions every 5 seconds and return them as JSON data to the front end. And once the front end gets that data, it can use it to actually update the positions of these markers, and it can do that by clearing out the existing markers from the layer group that we've created, or the feature group that we've created, and then adding the new positions to that feature group. So we're going to start doing that in a second, but one thing to note is we are going to update the map, but we don't want to re-render the entire map every 5 seconds. That would be quite a waste of resources. Instead, we just want to update the positions of the markers on the map, and we're using the layer group or the feature group to group them together so that we can easily get rid of those and bring in the new markers. So let's go back to VS Code now, and I'm going to go to the views.py file, and what we're going to do in this file is define a new view in Django, and this new view is going to be responsible for returning the positions of all of the vehicles in our database as JSON data to the client-side application. Now at the top of this file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in an import from Django's HTTP module. We're going to bring in the JSON response because in this new view, we're going to return JSON data. So let's define the view here, and we're going to call it vehicle positions. And this view will take the Django request as an argument, and the code is going to be very similar to what we had up here for the context. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy this statement here, which converts the query set of vehicles to a list of Python dictionaries. We're going to bring that down here, and we're just going to return a JSON response. And to that JSON response, actually I'm just going to copy this entire dictionary here, and we're going to paste that in below. So we have a key of vehicles, and the values are going to be very similar to what we had in the JSON script output. So this view, when it's called, is just going to fetch all of the vehicles' latitudes and longitudes and return those as JSON data, essentially a list of the latitudes and longitudes that we have in the database. So that's the new view that's responsible for returning that data. We now need a URL that's going to call the view. So let's create a new path within urls.py. I'm creating a path with the string vehicle positions, and that path will then call out to that view that we've just created, which will then return the positions of those vehicles. So that's the path. We now need to call that endpoint using our client-side JavaScript code. So let's go back to the index.html template here, and in a second we're going to create a function that's going to be called from this template, and we're going to do that in the script.js. So we're going to call that function here, but first of all we need to actually create the function. So let's go over to script.js, and I'm going to create a new function here. So let's create a new function here, and we're going to call it update markers, and it's going to take in that marker feature group that we created within the index.html file, and that's this feature group here. It's the feature group that we added to the map, and then we added all the markers to that feature group. So we're going to reference that by passing it as a parameter to this function that we're creating here. Now step 1 of this function, we want to send a request to the server and get the new latitude and longitude data. So we're going to send what's called a fetch request, and this is just an HTTP request to our backend. And we need to specify the endpoint that we want to use. So let's go back to urls.py. We had an endpoint here called vehicle positions. Let's go back to our script here, and we're going to reference that string here, and that's going to then call the URL that's going to be matched up with the correct Django view. Now the fetch request returns something called a promise. We can then use the .then function to get the response, and then we can convert that response to JSON data with the response.json function. Once again, that returns a promise, so we then use the .then function again, and finally after the response.json function has completed, that will have returned our data. We can use that within a callback function here. So before we go on, let me just quickly explain this statement again. We send a fetch request to Django, vehicle, that will then return a response, but that will not happen immediately. It's an asynchronous call, so we use a promise to get the response when it arrives back to our application, and then we convert that response from JSON data to JavaScript objects, something that can be used within our JavaScript code. Again, that returns a promise, so we use .then, and we get the data after that promise resolves, and we can then use that data within the body of this function here. Now when we get new positions, what we're going to do is grab the feature group here, and we're going to get rid of all of the markers that existed in that feature group before. Now to get rid of all of the items or all of the layers within the marker feature group, it has a function called clear layers that we can call. And by default, what that's going to do is just remove all of the items from the map. And that's just going to remove all of the features that we have within that feature group. Once we've done that, we can take our data, and that has a key called vehicles, and that comes from our backend response. We had a key within the dictionary of the JSON response called vehicles. So let's copy that and go back to our script. So it's going to be data.vehicles, which is a list of JavaScript objects containing a latitude and a longitude. For each one of those, we want to actually create a marker for that particular latitude and longitude. So we can use the for each function, and we pass to that another callback function. For each vehicle in the data, we are going to create a new function here and plot the marker as part of that feature group. So for each vehicle, we're going to create a variable called new latitude longitude, and that's going to be a JavaScript array with the vehicle's new latitude and the new longitude from the backend server. Once we have that, we're going to use the leaflet.marker function again, and we can add that new latitude and longitude as a marker, and we're going to add that to our feature group. So it's the marker feature group here. So let's save this, and we're going to go to the front end, and we're going to see if this works. Let's refresh the page, and we have these markers on the map. Let's see if we can see these dynamically updating. Now I've zoomed into this particular marker here, but there are no updates coming through, and that's because we haven't actually called the function. So once we have this, let's save the file, and we're going to copy the name of this function that we've defined here. We need to actually call that every 5 seconds. We're going to do that from our index.html within this event listener here. Now in JavaScript, we can call a function every 5 seconds or any time interval using this setInterval function here. Now the first argument to setInterval is a callback function, and this is what executes at the given time period, for example every 5 seconds. Now what we want to do is call this update markers function. So we're going to actually call that here within the callback function. And remember, that takes the marker feature group as an argument. And the second parameter to setInterval is the time period that we want to actually call that function. For us, it's going to be 5,000 milliseconds, so 5 seconds. Every 5 seconds, we're going to call update markers, and that function is then going to send an AJAX request to Django and get the new positions for each of these vehicles in our database. And it's then going to add a marker for the new position to this feature group here, and hopefully we're going to see that reflected on the map that we have here in the front end. So once you've saved all that code, you can refresh this page, and we're going to zoom into one marker in particular, and it's going to be this one here. Remember, you will have a random set of markers if you're following along with this video. Now you can see at the moment that this marker is not moving, it's not updating its position. What we need to do in order to actually update the positions is actually run this simulator here, this management command, and this command is going to actually update the vehicle's latitude and longitude every 5 seconds. Now we need to run this command along with our Django server. The Django server needs to be running so that the AJAX request from script.js actually finds the vehicle positions endpoint and returns the data. So we're going to keep the server running in VS Code, and I'm going to bring a terminal in here, and we're going to run the Python manage.py simulate vehicle movement command. So let's actually start executing this command. Once we're doing that, we can see that the positions of these markers, they should update every 5 seconds with the new position of the vehicle. So we can imagine this being a real-time scenario where we have every 5 seconds an update to a given vehicle's position in the database. And if we scroll out here, you can see that these small updates are occurring for all of the markers in our data. They're all being updated every 5 seconds based on this new setup that we have. So let's summarize what's going on here. If we go back to our index.html file, when the page first loads, we create the map at that given center point and zoom level. We then load in the vehicle positions from this script tag that we've defined using the JSON script template filter, and that will then bring that data into this JavaScript application. We then add a feature group to the map, and for each vehicle in the data that we've loaded, we add a marker to that feature group at the given position for that particular vehicle. Finally, we are using the setInterval function here to run a bit of code every 5 seconds, and that code is going to update the markers, and that's done using this function within our script.js. It sends a fetch request to our Django view, which then returns the data for the vehicles, the updated vehicle positions. When we get that updated data, we clear out the layers that exist within the feature group, and then for each vehicle, we create a new marker at its given position that's coming back from the Django server. And the positions are updating because we're running this particular command here, the simulate movement command, and every 5 seconds, that's going to update the position of all vehicles in our database. So that's the crux of this video. We're going to show one more thing in the video, and that's how to draw a line between the vehicle's previous position and its new position. Now to do that, we're going to amend the code within this update markers function. What I'm going to do to start with is create an empty JavaScript array called previous lat longs, and then what we're going to do is we're going to get the previous positions of the markers that we see on the map, and we're going to do that using the marker feature group here. So let's copy the name of that variable, and below this empty array we're going to reference that feature group, and it has a function called each layer, and this is a function that's similar to the JavaScript for each function. Basically this function will look at all of the layers that belong to a feature group, and that can be markers, it can be polylines, it can be any kind of object on the map. It's going to iterate over all of them, and it allows you to perform some sort of logic in that particular layer. Now what I'm going to do to start with is we're just going to console.log the layer that we're iterating over, and we're going to save that and go back to the page and refresh this page. If we go to the developer tools, you should see after 5 seconds here that we are getting some statements printed to the console, and we're getting 5 objects every 5 seconds, and each one of these represents one of the layers on this layer group, this feature group, and each layer represents one of the markers on the map. And you can see that they have a property called _lat_long, which contains the latitude and the longitude for that marker on the map. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the code here, and we're going to fetch that latitude and longitude, and we're going to push it to this array here that we created on line 13. So let's remove the console.log statement, and we're going to add some new code here. Let's say previous lat_longs.push, and we're going to push the layers._lat_long property. So after this code on line 14 runs, this particular array above will be populated with the latitude and longitude of the previous positions for the given markers on the map. After we've done that, we can go down to this for each loop here, where we are adding the new vehicle positions to this marker feature group. And what I'm going to do here is we're going to not only get a reference to the vehicle in the data, but we're going to get the index of iteration as well. And we can do that in the for each statement by having the data as the first argument and the index as the second argument. So for each vehicle in the data, we get a reference to the vehicle at each stage, as well as the index that we are iterating over, and we're going to use that index to actually index into this array here and get the corresponding previous position for that vehicle. So let's now go to the body of this for each function, and we're going to create a variable called previous latitude longitude, and that's going to be equal to another JavaScript array here, and the latitude and longitude are going to come from this array that we built up above. We're going to index in at the given index, and we're going to get the latitude here, and we're going to do the same thing for the longitude. So let's copy that and paste it here and replace the name of the field with longitude. So now we have the previous latitude and longitude for a given marker, as well as its new position. So these vehicles, we have their previous and their new positions. What we're going to do is add another object, another layer to this feature group, and that's the layer called polyline. And the polyline layer takes a list, and each element within that list is another list of latitude and longitude pairs. So we're going to reference the previous latitude and longitude as well as the new one here, and that's going to create a line between that previous point and the new point. And actually this polyline layer can take as many different positions as you want to give it. So we could give it more positions here, and it would create a line between each consecutive pair of points within that JavaScript array. For us it's easy, we only have 2 points, so it's going to create a line from the first point to the second point. And of course we need to add that to our feature group, so we'll use the add to function, and we can reference the marker feature group here. So let's save that and go back to our page and refresh this page. We're going to see that this doesn't actually work, and we're going to get to the reason for that in a second. We are only left with one marker, and if we inspect the console here, you can see that it cannot read properties of undefined. Now that error doesn't tell us a lot about what's going on, but let's go back to the code. And the problem lies within this statement here, where we iterate over each layer in the feature group, and we're trying to push the layers latitude and longitude to this array above. But the problem is we have now added polylines to this feature group, and polylines, they are different from markers. They don't have a specified latitude and longitude. This is a list of different points and it's creating lines between those points. So this property doesn't actually exist on the polyline layer. So we're going to actually check for the existence of that property before we try and push the latitude and longitude to this list above. So before we push that, we're going to write some JavaScript here and we're going to check that that property exists. We can do that with the layer.hasOwnProperty function in JavaScript. And of course the property we're checking for is the _lat_long property. And then we can use the logical AND in JavaScript to say that if that property does exist, we will then push the property or the value of the property to this array that's defined above. And when you write these statements here in JavaScript with the logical AND, this is actually a short circuit operator. So if this evaluates to false, the code after it will not actually be run. So we're not going to try and push something that doesn't exist to that particular array above, because it will short circuit if this evaluates to false and it will not run the code after the AND statement. So the effect of this statement is it's going to check for the _lat_long property. If it does exist, it's then going to push the value of that to the array above. So let's now save this and go back to the page. If we refresh this page, we now see the markers, but we're actually going to see we still have an issue on this page. We're still getting this error here. And the reason for that is something I'm going to show you now. We're going to comment this code out, and I'm actually going to copy that code and print it below, and I'm going to remove the body of this callback function. And again, I'm just going to console.log the layer at each iteration of this FeatureGroup.eachLayer function. Let's go back to the page and we're going to see the console.log statements. And I'm going to show you where I've went wrong in this code. It's going to print out the 5 marker positions. And if we look at the layers _lat_long field, you can see it's a JavaScript object and it has the key names of lat and long here. So what I've done in the code here, when we created this previous latitude and longitude, we were referencing .latitude and .longitude. We need to change that to match what's in the JavaScript object. So let's change that to .lat, and we'll change the second one to .long here. We can now get rid of this statement with the console log and bring back the code that we had above that. And we can then go back to the page and refresh this page. Now hopefully if we zoom in here to a marker, we should see its position is updating and it's drawing a line between the previous position and the new position. And that's going to keep happening for every movement of the vehicle. It's going to take the previous position and it's going to update the position to the new position and draw a line between those using the leaflet polyline function. And this is just updating randomly this vehicle. It's not a real vehicle, of course. So it's jittering about the map randomly. It's not a particularly coherent simulation, but we're just demonstrating here how we can update positions on a map. If I close the developer tools, you can see this is happening for all 5 of our vehicles in the database. Every 5 seconds, it's getting a new position and these are being updated on the page. Now you could extend this in all sorts of different ways. You could store a historical list of every position that a given vehicle has been in. If you do that, of course, your database is very rapidly going to grow in size, so you might need some data engineering strategies to manage such large volumes of data. For our purposes, we just have a map. We're updating the map every 5 seconds without any refreshing of the page, and we're doing that by using an AJAX function and JavaScript's setInterval function to send a request to Django which responds with the data we need every 5 seconds. So that's all for this video. Thank you for watching. We've seen in this video how to use Leaflet.js to plot the points of vehicles on a map. We've seen how to add markers and polylines to feature groups within a leaflet map, and how we can clear all of the elements within that feature group using the clear layers function, and then add other elements after that. And we've seen how to send an AJAX request every 5 seconds to get the updated positions of these vehicles, and then add them to the map. And if you have any ideas about how we could extend this example, please let me know in the comments. I'm happy to try and make more videos on Django and Leaflet.js. But for now, thank you for watching. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video.